Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video and myself, Jonathan MS Piss. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 24th of April 2025. I'm rough as a badger's arse today. I had a COVID jab yesterday because I'm immunosuppressed and it's flared my multiple sclerosis up, which it always does, so it's nothing unusual there, but just means my mind is befuddled and I'm a little bit COVID-y, I guess. A little bit MSy, so apologies if I don't make much sense this morning. Okay, let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to the video below. We've only got 3 tabs in this section because it's all about the strikes last night. Some pretty horrendous strikes on Ukraine, particularly Kyiv, but other places as well. We'll come on to that. I think that strangled the bandwidth a little bit. Not so many videos about hits and losses and information concerning these categories here. Nonetheless, we'll go through the stats. 1,060 personnel lost. That's over 1,000, but at the lower end of our normal range. 3 tanks, 5 armoured fighting vehicles. That's a couple of categories that are very low there. 49 artillery systems, well over double the daily average, but a bit of a downtick from previous days. A single multiple launch rocket system and 134 vehicles and fuel tanks. Interesting that there are no cruise missiles on the list from last night, which means that the list was cut off actually quite early, it appears. So that gives us an indication when they do close the list off. It's actually probably quite early in the evening, might even be, say, 12 o'clock at night. They close this list off, and then anything that comes thereafter will be on the list for the day after. And that's why we often get a mixture of 2 nights worth of activity when it comes to cruise missiles and drone shoot downs and whatnot. So, yeah, really yet to see the effects of last night's missile attack as much as anything. Right, yesterday there were 3 explosions in the center of Moscow, the chamber of the famous Moscow city, according to Russian media. It was a car exploding in an underground car park. I don't know if this has anything to do with sabotage, but certainly causing a bit of a ruckus in the Moscow city center. It could be partisan activity. I don't know that you very often get cars that just randomly explode. I mean, it can happen. But yeah, happening in a country that's at war, you're more likely to connect it to something to do with the war. And when you've got 3 explosions being heard, and you're thinking probably something connected to the war, but who knows? I've got a video here. Actually, I should have had this before the last one. Russian hangar with armoured vehicles has been destroyed from the inside by fibre optic drones of the Birds of Magyar unit. So these guys are particularly competent in the work that they do. Here, what you see, quite interesting that in here there's quite a bit of kit. Oops, I've accidentally sent it back to the beginning. Quite a bit of kit in here. You've got a sort of tracked garden shed with some kind of mine plow on the front. You've got another Cope KG vehicle there, and one presumes further down in the warehouse more equipment. And then going in to the vehicle and blowing it up. And this, I don't know whether that's just one drone that did that or several drones going in, but the equipment looks pretty much burnt out and that warehouse somewhat collapsed. So doing a good job there, the Birds of Magyar, finding these hidden bits of equipment and taking them out. Okay, moving on to strikes. And we're going to start with Dmitry Peskov giving this statement, and goodness me, doesn't this say it all? Quote, retaliatory attacks on Ukrainian civilian targets are not a war crime, says Peskov. As always, when Russians speak up, it's a lie, says Jurgen Naudit. Attacks on civilian targets, even in retaliation, are generally war crimes under international law, international humanitarian law in particular. The Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court prohibits deliberate attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, regardless of the motive. And it's interesting that Peskov gets away with saying stuff like this, and there's no reply from particularly the United States of America. And we're going to be talking about this in the last section of this video because of peace negotiations. I mean, we're at the stage, as I said last night in a bit of a ranty video, we're at a stage where we just need to accept that the US has joined the other side, or at least the administration has. So we had a wide-scale attack last night with Kyiv city being targeted. Here you have explosions being seen outside of windows in the middle of Kyiv or in Kyiv suburbs. Donald Trump and his spokespeople spent the day attacking President Zelensky, claiming he and not Putin is the obstacle to peace. And then Putin just sends missiles into capital cities. And that's met with silence from the United States. But it's all Zelensky's fault, isn't it? It's just absolutely unconscionable. Tim White says 9 people died in Kyiv and 70 are injured after the biggest attack on the capital for almost 10 months. And we'll look at numbers in a second. Ukraine has just released details of the overnight attack, with Russia firing in total 215 objects, 70 missiles, and 145 attack drones. So they fired 70 missiles. Don't know how many of those were shot down. Actually, we'll find out in a second how many are shot down. But that would put this missile attack, the shoot downs would probably be somewhere around here, probably below 60. That would rate this attack there. No, you can't see that because my face is in the way, obviously. So that would rate this attack somewhere around here. And you can see that we've had a few weeks, really, actually, a couple of months of not many missile attacks. In fact, you're going back to December when it was a pretty hairy time for the Ukrainians. There were a lot of attacks in December after a period of very few attacks. So they do this stockpiling, don't they? It's what they did in this period before there were a couple of days of heavy attacks. And then a bit of a period there, stockpiling for these more consistent, more densely arranged stats there. There's your stockpiling period. Here's your stockpiling period. And then here's your stockpiling period for a heavier attack today. But still not the sorts of attacks that we've seen previously. Makes you wonder how many missiles the Russians are able to produce. But actually that's not appeared as we know on the stats yet. That's why there's no line there, but I think it would be somewhere around here. Let's go and look at those stats then. So Tim White says 13 of the 145 drones, about 9%, did beat the air defense. So it's not the worst of days in terms of interception, but if you're sending 145 drones in, they've got massive payloads on. Every one of those that you shoot down, if that's over urban areas, that's going to cause damage to civilian infrastructure. 64 were shot down, 68 fell harmlessly. Ukraine also shot down 48 out of 70 rockets, so 48 is what it is. So that would be somewhere around here, there, because this is the shoot down numbers, not the total numbers that are shot. I'd love to see a graph actually of the total numbers of missiles sent in to Ukraine, irrespective of the interception rates, and see, the data presentation of that. So we had 7 of the 11 ballistic missiles were shot down. That's not too bad, actually, considering ballistic missiles are the most difficult to shoot down. 31 out of 37 KH-101 cruise missiles. 0 out of 6 Iskander-K cruise missiles. They seem to be able to get through. I don't know what the Iskander-K what their capabilities are and why the Ukrainians appear to find it more difficult to shoot them down. The Iskander-M missile is their ballistic missile, one of their ballistic missiles that they use. 6 out of 12 caliber cruise missiles. So you're getting each time 6, 6, 6. That's 18 missiles getting through there. And then all 4 KH-5969 guided missiles were taken out. So quite a few missiles getting through there. That is, as I say, 18 cruise missiles, and then you've got 4 ballistic missiles. So 22 missiles getting through and presumably reaching their targets or near to their targets. That is going to be something of a really heavy night for the Ukrainians, obviously, but something of a problem for them if that many missiles get through. This is what the map looks like of the estimated trajectory of the incoming missiles and drones. You can see that Kyiv was very much targeted. You've got Dnipro, you've got Kharkiv, And you've got Kherson as well, actually, getting a lot of drones, attack drones, focusing there. And then further to the west of, is that Zhytomyr, of Kyiv there? I think that's Zhytomyr, getting some attention. In fact, here we've got another map. Ukraine can shoot down so many missiles and Shaheds, but we don't have enough air defense systems. Interior, it cannot shoot down so many. It cannot shoot down so many, says the Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko. Yeah, a lot of places targeted last night. Actually doesn't have Kherson there, but a lot of other places targeted, as well as obviously Kyiv. Kyiv had a lot of focus. So 9 regions were hit by drones and missiles. Kyiv and Kyiv region, yeah, Zhytomyr region, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Poltava, Khmelnytsky, Sumy, and Zaporizhia. Another massive missile and drone attack on Ukraine last night. People were carrying in the metro, as you can imagine. Kyiv, by preliminary information, 9 people were killed, over 70 injured, 31 people, including 5 children, are in hospital. Search and rescue operations continue. They're searching through rubble. Some buildings have been completely destroyed by the looks of it. Kyiv region, at least 3 districts were attacked. Residential buildings, cars, shops, and public transport stop were damaged. In Bucha district, 2 women suffered acute stress reactions. Kharkiv, there were 24 strikes on the city, 10 missiles, and 14 drones. Wow, Kharkiv getting absolutely hammered. High-rise residential buildings, private homes, a clinic, school, industrial facilities, and a hotel complex were damaged. 1 person was hospitalized. Zhytomyr, private garages were damaged, and a fire broke out. Shockwaves from the explosions shattered windows in several apartment buildings. A rescue was injured, and 4 emergency service vehicles were damaged. Khmelnytsky, 2 people were injured. Gas distribution facility, so evidently some energy facilities being hit. Residential buildings and a summer area in a park of culture and recreation were damaged. Dnipropetrovsk in Pavlograd, a strike hit an industrial facility, no casualties reported. Zaporizhia, 2 high-rise buildings and an administrative building were damaged. Railway infrastructure in Kyiv, Zhytomyr and Kharkiv region, railway infrastructure and administrative and technical buildings were damaged by the Russian strikes, according to the Ukrainian railways. And 2 railway workers were also injured. So I wonder if railways were one of the targets for last night. Of course, these summaries will generally not tell you about military targets that were hit or targeted due to OPSEC. And so you can imagine that there were a whole bunch of military targets, maybe air bases, maybe surface-to-air missile systems, whatever, we don't know, that were targeted as well and may well have been hit last night, given that a fair number of drones and missiles got through. Now, Ukraine's capital was under a massive Russian missile attack last night. There were numerous impacts and quite a bit of footage that was released. Seen below, Russian cruise missile is shredded by a Ukrainian SAM over the city. So the surface-to-air missiles doing their job, but of course, you know, what goes up must come down, and all of that debris will fall to the floor, to the ground. Reuters last night showed the moment of a ballistic missile strike on Kyiv, says Anton Gerashenko. The previous video said that this was, I think it's the same, I think these are stills from that image, from that video, was saying it was a cruise missile, and it does look like that's a sort of explosion of something going left to right, as opposed to up and down, but that's a ballistic missile as far as I can work out. Now, I don't know if that ballistic missile was taken out, whether this is all from exactly the same instance, but certainly to me that looks like a ballistic missile in that image for sure. A whole apartment block was nearly destroyed by Russia in a European capital city tonight, said Tim White last night. The injury count in Kyiv is sure to rise. Other nearby buildings were also badly damaged. Ooh, that scared me. Here you have a sense of the damage that was done. Just, yeah, huge amount of damage. And of course, this is happening every night in different places around Ukraine. Just the cost of this, the human cost is obviously terrible. The psychological cost, as well as the physiological cost. You know, lives are lost, but lives are damaged, both physically and mentally. And then, of course, you have the material cost as well. Among the wounded in Kyiv are 3 children and a pregnant woman, according to Mayor Klitschko. The Shahid attack on Kyiv here being reported in this video. And again, massive destruction being done to what looks like residential buildings, which is unsurprising. Not that these were necessarily the targets, but of course, you're going to shoot these drones down above a city. This is what unfortunately will happen. 2 children from one family died as a result of the Russian attack on Kyiv, according to Klimenko. The demolition of the rubble at the site of the strikes on the capital is currently ongoing, or the clearing of the rubble. Just absolutely heartbreaking. And again, met by silence from the Americans. Trump spent yesterday blaming Zelensky. I assume he'll say absolutely fricking nothing about this. I assume that Putin gets off the fricking hook. I assume that the next time we hear Trump talk about Putin, it's in favourable terms. And I assume the next time he talks about Zelensky, it's in unfavourable terms. And I assume that Trump is just going to continually give Putin elbow room to commit these atrocities night after night with no riposte from the American administration. It's absolutely disgusting. It's disgusting. And I'm just so fed up with that absolute muppet that's in charge of the United States of America at the moment. That he can align himself with the bad guys just blows my mind. It's already known that 9 people are killed in the Russian attack last night, more than 70 injured, including children and a pregnant woman, again, says Anton Gerashenko. And you can see the horrific scenes here from Kyiv. This woman says, "This is my mother. She would have turned 85 this year. Although she was elderly, she was not going to die yet." A daughter sits next to her mother, Olena Lunivna, who was killed by Russia in Sviatoshnisky district of Kyiv, which was hit the hardest last night. Just so heartbreaking and anger-inducing as far as I'm concerned. Anton Gerashenko says 1 residential building was completely destroyed. 15 people lived there. Only 6 have been found so far. Rescuers are still dismantling the rubble. And we can see that taking place here. So rescuers pulled a person from the rubble. He's alive, thankfully. He's a young man. He spent over 6 hours trapped under the debris. Rescuers found him during a moment of silence. They are announced at regular intervals. There might be more people under the debris here. Well, there are more missing, that's for sure. So here we have... Sorry, it was very loud. So there you go. At least someone has been found alive, so that's good news there. Euromaidan Press reports, quote, "Phones are heard ringing under the rubble. 2 children missing after Russia attacks Kyiv and kills 10. So we're up to 10 now and injures dozens. Russia targeted the Ukrainian capital with explosive drones, ballistic and cruise missiles last night." And then, of course, it's not just Kyiv, is it? Here, Kharkiv was hit with over 20 Russian strikes, both with drones and cruise missiles. There are injured people. It's reported that one of the strikes is on a residential area, which is to assume that, or to imply that most of the strikes were not on residential areas there. So we don't know what was hit in Kharkiv, but that looks to have been very heavily focused upon as a city. Unsurprisingly so, close to the border as it is. Now, the Ukrainians were active earlier in the night. Actually, the first things that we were hearing last night was concerning the strikes by Ukraine on particularly Crimea. Explosions and gunfire reported in the northern Crimean Canal in Krasnoperekrovsk district of occupied Crimea. Local channels claim shootdowns, but witnesses say the number of blasts far exceeded any interceptions. New drone groups are reportedly approaching from the west. As per normal, we don't really have too much battle damage assessment on what happened. We also know that much further to the southeast, Kryuchevoye and Simferopol, strong explosions were heard there, or evidence there. Also in Stary Krim, an explosion happened. So right across Crimea from the north to the south. According to Russian monitoring channels, explosions arrivals were reported at the Kirovska military air base in occupied Crimea. So we'll have to see what has happened. I guess over the next few days we'll get more information emerging. And then Moscow region columnar, there are explosions caught on CCTV, but we don't know any details. So no solid details about anything that was hit by the Ukrainians last night. But as per usual, you can imagine the Ukrainians were striking and were going about their usual business of striking particularly military targets. Now, Ukraine's general staff confirmed the precision strike from yesterday on a Russian drone production plant, which is over 1,000 kilometers from the border. This is something I've been saying over and over and over, is that this should be target number one. All of those drones that were flying into Ukrainian airspace last night, 145 of them, they could have been not existing if Ukraine had hit and destroyed all of the drone production facilities. So I speculate that they hit one some weeks back, maybe a month ago or so, because we then suddenly saw a downtick in Russian drones. Then we're back up to sort of 150, 145, which is not the peak of the Russian drone usage, but it is getting towards there again. There are claims that this Yalabuga facility in Tatarstan, over 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, produces around 300 Shahid drones daily, and it was hit the other night. So I hope that has done some damage to the production capacity, the capability of that facility to produce these things. Exact damage is yet to be determined, though. Anton Gerashenko said Ukrainian General Staff confirms that strike on Alabuga, 1,054 kilometers from the border, and you can see here, as I showed you yesterday, all those slow-moving drones that attacked the facility, and supposedly 5 out of 6 of them got through, and as of now, damage to the drone's final assembly shop has been confirmed. Or at least been claimed, I guess. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces, and we're going to go straight into really peace negotiations. Michael Weiss says, as a journalist concerning himself with Ukraine, a former Ukrainian official just messaged me, Kyiv's rejection of Trump's recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. Quote, Zelensky has no other choice. He legally cannot, and the people of Ukraine won't agree to, change the constitution. So, end quote. So re-upping this thread from a few days ago on how Trump's pendulous swing of US policy toward Moscow may not work the way he thinks it will. So he had said the other day, I've been emphasizing lately the unintended consequences of Trump's headlong embrace of Russia. Consequences not wholly undesirable for Russia. While it's wonderful for Moscow to see an American president so eager to realign with Russia's strategic interests and so keen to denigrate and alienate American allies, in that realignment, smarter figures in the Kremlin realize the hazards of such an embarrassment of riches. A helpful constant in this administration's rush to give Putin everything all at once is that the worst capitulationist ideas are being stress tested in the media and in the GOP almost as soon as they're invented, and often before the Trump administration has agreed on whether or not they're feasible. One of these ideas is that the US will recognize Crimea as Russian territory. As you might expect, this was Steve Witkoff's proposal, which is to say it was Vladimir Putin's. Dim Philby isn't so much an envoy as an unblinking relay of Putin's maximalist demands, all of which he presents to Trump in as eminently reasonable, if not accomplished facts. Recall Witkoff's lie that Russia was in full control of the Ukrainian regions it annexed, regions Witkoff doesn't know the names of, when it is in full control of none of them. The Krim-Nash brain fart, untold, happened without any interagency coordination or buy-in from principals, least of all Marco Rubio, who is at odds with Witkoff on this and on much else, regardless of the flattering tweets he is obliged to post about his scandalous colleague. Now notice the little nuance in the Wall Street Journal story cited above. Quote, a senior State Department official on Sunday cast the ideas presented to the Ukrainians as options for Kyiv to weigh and not to take it or leave it proposition. The official said the list of potential options was shared for discussion and feedback. A spokesman for the National Security Council didn't respond to a request for comment. Quote, senior State Department official, indeed, you can almost hear the word of the backpedal in that paragraph. Giving up Crimea in a de facto or de jure capacity is a non-starter for Ukraine, as any junior State Department official can tell you. Zelensky could never sell it domestically, even if he wanted it to, and he doesn't, because the political blowback would be severe and almost certainly unite opposition to both the policy and the presidency in a way that would make the resistance he experienced over the Steinmeier formula look coy. This might even result in a far more nationalistic and hawkish political figure to emerge as frontrunner for the Ukrainian presidency, exactly the opposite of what the Putin-Vance-Carlson triumvirate has been angling for. Furthermore, the failed 2023 counteroffensive meant to sever Russia's direct line of communication from occupied Donbass to Crimea was largely about isolating Crimea for future recapture. Crimea is more strategically valuable to Ukraine. It is also seen as easier to liberate than Donbass, as Budanov has stated. For this reason, quite a lot of Ukrainian soldiers gave their lives in 2023 trying to break through to the Sea of Azov in service of this long-term objective. Budanov himself was wounded during a special operations raid in the peninsula before the full-scale invasion. His bravery in that op is one of the reasons he became head of the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence. So what of these sacrifices if Kyiv forfeits Crimea, especially absent something permanent, concrete and real to show for it, such as NATO membership, which the Trump administration is also reportedly ruling out in peace talks? Well, Biden all but ruled that out too at the nadir of US-Russian relations, and it still wasn't good enough for Putin to offer any concessions. So just a few more here. Europeans get a say here too, as they will on any final settlement. However much that upsets the isolationists in the White House. There are EU sanctions in place over Russia's 2014 seizure of Crimea, and the European Commission, which votes by consensus on sanctions, will not lift them. The takeover of Crimea, waged on the pretext of protecting ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, also has ominous resonances on the continent. This was the first Anschluss on European soil since World War II, and it isn't so easily certified because of a shady developer from the Bronx thinks it's a fair bargain. Finally, handing Crimea to Putin also runs some significant legal and political obstacles in the United States. US recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea and other occupied territories of Ukraine is prohibited by a series of laws and executive orders, including ones issued by Trump in his first term. Some of these provisions are pegged to sanctions against the FSB and GRU, so that's Russian operatives, oligarchs and Russian officials who were involved in the 2014 seizure of the peninsula. See, for instance, EO Executive Order 13660 and 13685. Many of these provisions were further codified by the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Acts, CAATSA, designed to, in no small way, to tie Trump's hands with respect to Russia sanctions during his first term. He nonetheless signed this act into law in 2017, quite possibly because he didn't understand it and it was too complicated to pictorialize with a Sharpie. Waiving CAATSA sanctions requires a congressional vote. This is what I talked about yesterday. And Trump signed this into law, and so in order to lift sanctions on Crimea and on Russia, he has to that has to go through Congress. Many of the points I made above are now being made by Hill staffers to members of the press and to Trump administration officials who may be unaware of the implications of what would be a massive reversal in a decade-old US policy. While this may not put the kibosh on the Crimea sellout, it certainly complicates it in a way that might have been avoided if the pro-Russian camp in the US government didn't try to do so much so quickly with big goofy smiles on their faces. My guess is Witkoff faces stronger internal opposition for his ongoing Iran diplomacy, which is so far shaping up to be the preliminaries of JCPOA 2.0, Dark Nights of Seoul at AIPAC and FTD right about now. I'm not sure what that means, but continually over-promising and under-delivering on Ukraine has its downside too. Namely, the Russians get frustrated and impatient at their own agent of influence's inability to close, and that means their man in the White House gets frustrated and impatient. Before you know it, he's threatening to wash his hands of the whole affair. So really important analysis, in my opinion, there from Michael Weiss. Now, 3 years ago, Senator Rubio co-sponsored an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to prohibit the US recognition of Crimea as part of Russia. He then argued Crimea was Ukraine. And now Secretary Rubio is pushing the deal under which the US would recognize Crimea as Russian. This is weak. It's just weak. The US administration is weak as hell. And then, of course, we had the Crimea Declaration from the then Secretary of Defense, Mike Pompeo, that I talked about yesterday. This was a formal policy of the Trump 1.0 administration. Like, as he said in 2021, January the 3rd, the end of the Trump administration, Secretary Pompeo said, huge step forward, I issued the Crimea Declaration, which reversed the ban on lethal military assistance to Ukraine. Obama wouldn't send fighters weapons, and we did. Now, of course, the US administration has gone completely in the other direction, and they seem to be loving it. JD Vance says this.
So just to clarify, so you want the current lines of war in the war in Ukraine to remain the same under your proposal?
No, I didn't say that. What I said is the current lines, somewhere close to them, is where you're ultimately, I think, going to draw the new lines in the conflict. Now, of course, that means the Ukrainians and the Russians are both going to have to give up some of the territory they currently own. There's going to have to be some territorial swaps. So I wouldn't say the exact lines, but we want...
Okay, massive problem with this, right? Both sides are going to have to give up some territory that they own. Of course, by own, he means that one side has stolen. So both sides aren't going to have to give up stuff. Really, it's only about Ukraine giving up stuff. It's how much Ukraine gives to Russia. So the analogy would be, and sorry to use Doris again, but, you know, Ivan mugs Doris, steals her purse, gets 200 quid out the purse, and then Brad comes along and says, right, I'm completely neutral here. I don't really care about this. I don't really care that you've kicked the crap out of Doris and she's got a bloody face and she's on the floor with a broken arm and a dislocated hip. I don't really care about that. What I want you to do is compromise on that £200 that you have stolen from Doris. So we have to make both sides, both Ivan and Doris, you both have to make concessions. So Ivan, you're going to have to give £10 of that back to Doris. So Ivan's like, well, I've just nicked this 200 quid off Doris anyway, and my concession is giving 10 quid of it back. Yeah, whatever. There's 10 quid back. I get to keep 190 quid. That's my concession. So Ivan mugs Doris, and his concession is giving some of what he'd stolen off Doris back. Both sides making concessions. Meanwhile, Doris has to give 190 quid to Ivan. That's her concession. That's what's going on here. And if you go and look at the map, I think it should give you an understanding of this. So the Ukrainians and Russians are both going to have to give up some of the territory they currently own, says JD Vance. To which Julian Rupka says, this map marks a territory the Ukrainians and the Russians are going to have to give up, according to the final US peace plan. So look what Ukraine has to concede. All of this area in red. Look what poor Russia has to concede. Here's the 10 quid they concede. And here's 190 quid that Ukraine has to concede. Both sides have to make these difficult concessions. Oh, it's so horrible for Russia. Oh, well, poor Russia. JD Vance can take a long walk off a very short pier.
And the only way to really stop the killing is for the armies to both put down their weapons, to freeze this thing, and to get on with the business of actually building a better Russia and a better Ukraine.
So he starts with building a better Russia. So we're going to get on with the business of building a better Russia and Ukraine. And this killing, the killing is only going to stop. Like Doris, the beating is only going to stop when you just give your money to Ivan. Just give your stuff to him. Stop being so weak. This is your fault that you got beaten up. It's not Ivan's fault. Who can blame Ivan for beating up his elderly neighbour? Oh, man. It's all so wrong. It's all so wrong. Trump refuses to say whether Ukraine could be forced to recognise Russia's illegal grab of Crimea. I don't care. I have no favourites. That's like Donnie looking at poor old Doris getting the crap kicked out of her, dislocated hip, broken arm, bloody face, and goes, I don't care. I've got no favourites in this. What you are doing is showing you're massively immoral. If you can't cast a moral evaluation over what has happened there with Doris, then you are evil. I don't really care who wins that. I know that Ivan just went and beat the absolute crap out of Doris. I don't really care. I've got no favourites. That's not neutrality, that's enabling aggression, says Noel reports. Ukraine's sovereignty isn't up for trade. Trump isn't brokering peace. He's making space for modern imperialism. And Shoigu, he's now in Putin's inner circle, says that EU peacekeepers in Ukraine could trigger World War III. He calls Ukraine our historical territory. To which Trump says nothing, to which J.D. Vance says nothing, to which Secretary of State Marco Rubio says nothing. And I think this question from Jim Sciutto here absolutely needs to be listened to. And the answer here from the former US ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Yeah.
President Trump's comments today. Once again, he blames Ukraine for the failure of peace efforts, we should note, and it's a fact. Ukraine actually agreed to Trump's ceasefire. Russia has not done so and offered no public concessions that we've at least heard publicly. Why does President Trump continue to blame Ukraine, hold Ukraine accountable, and not publicly hold Russia and Putin accountable?
Inexplicable, Jim. Inexplicable. As you reported, there's no doubt in anyone's mind. There's no doubt in the Russians' mind that they invaded Ukraine. First in 2014, as you've just pointed out, and then in 2022 in a massive invasion.
Inexplicable. It's inexplicable what he's doing. And even on Trump, even on Fox News here, you've got finally people calling out Trump for this.
It was the president, not the White House press secretary, but saying that they're disappointed in Zelensky, but they're moving forward.
Well, you know, he keeps pounding Zelensky and saying it's harder to deal with him than it is with Putin. Putin, so far as I can tell, hasn't agreed to much of anything except, yes, he'd love to annex Crimea, which is part of the proposal that's before him now. That's no concession. That's just all that is taking a gain. Zelensky resists that because Crimea, up until the Russian invaded it 10 years or so ago, was part of Ukraine. So I'm not exactly sure what the president is talking about when he says that Zelensky has been more difficult to deal with than Putin. You know, there have been a series of ceasefire proposals. Putin either hasn't agreed to them or has immediately broken them. I'm not sure, what concessions Putin will ever be willing to make, but he certainly hadn't made very many so far.
Yeah, we will see.
He's made no concessions, and that's so well put. And then you got General Ben Hodges.
Thanks, Jose. First of all, it's seeing Secretary of State Rubio, the Vice President, and the President all scrambling away from this disaster that they created as fast as they can. They're washing their hands of it. Remember, the President said 24 hours, we're at the 3-month mark, and now they're tired and they're giving up and walking away. That's probably the best thing that could happen to Ukraine is to get this administration out of it. The approach by the administration was doomed from the start because they either never understood or never cared about the history, the geography, or what's going on here. To say when the president says the Ukrainians are fighting for no apparent reason, they're fighting for their survival against a country that invaded them. How can the president of the United States say that the democratic country is fighting for its survival, is fighting for nothing? And Andrea is exactly right. I mean, from the beginning, this has been 100% pro-Russia. The fact that Mr. Witkoff uses Kremlin talking points better than Lavrov is all that we need to understand.
Nothing to disagree with there. Absolutely going hammer and tongs at the Trump administration. They've effectively changed sides. And Mike Sabaton says, I don't think anyone in the US even remotely realizes the level of betrayal they're engaging in. I know Americans couldn't care less about what Ukrainians think about them or Europeans, but this is a forever mark. Yeah, the damage is being done to America's sense of identity, to how we perceive the United States. We give Russia everything now with the possibility to have more in the future and blame you for not agreeing. That's kind of where it's at. Literally, Putin is not the problem. Russia is peace-loving. It's the warmonger Zelensky and his responsibility for everything. I hate this world. No nation deserves such treatment. I generally agree with that angry sentiment there. And Andrei Sybiha, the foreign minister for Ukraine, said yesterday's Russian maximalist demands for Ukraine to withdraw from its regions, combined with these brutal strikes last night that we've seen, show that Russia and not Ukraine is the obstacle to peace. Moscow, not Kyiv, is where pressure should be applied. And this is directly in response to the fact that the US is applying all the pressure to Ukraine, and yet Russia are the ones bombing the crap out of Kyiv. And committing war crimes and saying, yeah, these are perfectly legal, and not agreeing to any concessions. All the pressures on Ukraine. Putin demonstrates through his actions, not words, that he does not respect any peace efforts and only wants to continue the war. Weakness and concessions will not stop his terror and aggression. Only strength and pressure will. And we hear that Ukraine and the US are to start working on a free trade zone, according to Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister. The parties also discussed important political aspects of the long-debated future minerals deal between Kyiv and Washington. That's still to take place. And then finally, we hear a Chris Wiki thread here that Ukrainians are scamming millions of rubles a day from Russians and directing the proceeds to fund the Ukrainian armed forces, according to Russian investigators. They accuse the security service of Ukraine, the SPU, of being behind the scam operations. Russian journalist and war blogger Anastasia Kashevarova has posted on a Telegram channel that the results of an investigation by the SNOS call center, a group which is dedicated to countering Ukrainian scam operations against Russian citizens. The scams are said to be organized like regular businesses, complete with officers, employees, HR managers, and corporate policies. Kashevarova cites the example of a concern called Strong Call, which operates in Kyiv and several other Ukrainian cities. According to her, employees' salaries depend on how much they manage to scam from Russians and can reach up to 10,000 hryvnia daily, $239 daily, about half the average monthly salary in Ukraine. Bonuses are paid for the biggest scams. In the most notable case of a landing a whale, a former Moscow city prosecutor was reportedly scammed out of 20 million rubles, $240,000, by a 15-year-old boy from Zhytomyr. Kashevarova notes that Ukrainians' familiarity with the Russian language, a legacy of over 300 years of Russian occupation, is a great advantage for the scammers. Often crimes or fraudsters, victims of fraudsters tell our law enforcement officers that they did not suspect anything was wrong because the caller spoke without a Ukrainian accent and was extremely convincing. Here again, unfortunately, the established stereotype of call centers of some kind of fly-by-night operations comes into play. The same Strong Call regularly holds training sessions with employees. Expert psychologists and speech therapists teach them to speak with a Russian accent and persuade people from a distance. According to her, proceeds from the scams are sent weekly to support the Ukrainian armed forces. In one notable instance, the prominent Two Majors Telegram channel was scammed out of $18,000, which went to the Ukrainian army instead. She says that the scams are part of a wider criminal syndicate organized under the control of the SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, and writes, an official CRM system for fraud has been created and implemented in Ukraine. This is a special program in the system of which Ukrainian cyber terrorists receive all the data on the victim, create false documents, know how to behave and what to say so that the victim does not get off the hook. All scripts for communicating with victims were written down in the smallest detail. Screenshots 1, 2, and 3 at the top of the thread. So on and so forth. I mean, it's a much longer thread, but you get the point that this is happening, or at least the Russians are claiming this is happening. My position now, I'm so fed up with Russia that I could easily justify this as being part of consequentialist ethics of striving for a greater good. You commit crimes against the Russians in order to help the Ukrainians to prevail in this most moral of wars. And so that you can easily build a case, I think, that this is justifiable. But you'd have to do a bit of moral philosophy on that one. Okay, thank you for watching. Really appreciate your support. Don't forget that Car for Ukraine is a campaign that we are supporting. The Easter Paisanki campaign, together with a whole bunch of other... Oh my goodness, we're into 4th position now. Overtaking Rick and the Shills. Oh wow, I'm totally made up. We are making a rush for the finish line there. That's amazing. Well done, everybody. Please go to atpgeo.com/. donate and help us out here, and put ATP Geopolitics right up there amongst the most generous of the channels. We don't have the biggest following, but my goodness, I think we're the kindest and most awesome. And Michael Winkler, what a legend. Michael Winkler is such a strong supporter of the channel, and he is an absolute legend. Do not give up a square inch of land. Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you to all of you who have so generously contributed to this. Legends, one and all. Take care, and I'll speak soon.